So this past Valentine's Day, there was a shooting in Florida, at a Florida high school that killed 17 people. Now it's been a little while since it happened by now, but it's still really popular and relevant, and you know, it's just still on the topic of conversation no matter where you go. You hear it on the news, you see it on when you're scrolling through Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or whatever. And you know, I think you even have a class that's talking about it right now, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it's a topic of conversation in a lot of different places, and a lot of places of just public discussion. It's still very much relevant because, you know, it was a terrible, terrible, tragic event, and it brought up the issue of gun control.
I guess we're just kind of here to have a conversation about it. We're here to present facts on why gun control isn't the solution to this.
Right.
We actually have found that arming teachers would actually be a better solution than disarming everybody else.
Correct. And we'll explain why here in a little bit too.
Yeah, so we're not here to get on to people. We're not here to get angry with anybody with opposing opinions. We're just here to educate.
Right. I mean, this is something that we see, you know, even being the young generation that we are, we see it as a problem. And like he said, we're not here to get angry. We're just here to discuss it because it needs to be discussed. 17 people being killed in a high school isn't something that you can just say, well, we better fix that. You know, we actually, you know, need to come together as people and discuss this. So, as a result of the shooting, we saw an immediate response, especially from the left side of politics. People started using this shooting as an excuse to enact stricter gun laws, saying that the way to prevent these things from happening would be to enact gun control, or at least stricter gun laws and gun control, if not a total ban. However, we see from the facts and we see from a lot of research that we've done recently that that is not at all the case. Banning guns, enacting more gun control is not going to stop another shooting. It's only going to make it easier to happen.
One of the many claims that people who favor gun control make is that the United States is the only country in the world that has this big of a gun problem. That's not true at all. The U.S. is actually ranked 31st in gun homicide rates for 2016, and this is according to the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation. And we're also ranked 103rd in intentional homicide worldwide, despite having the most guns per capita of any country in the world.
By far.
By far. So according to the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation, there are 3.85 deaths per 100,000 people due to gun violence in America. Now this is ranked 31st as opposed to El Salvador, which is ranked number 1, that has 40.29 deaths per 100,000 people. And El Salvador has really strict gun laws. You know, they have gun licenses, strict background checks. Basically anything that has been brought up in conversation that people want to implement here, it's already implemented in El Salvador, plus probably some more.
And as a result of that, El Salvador has almost 4 times as many deaths due to gun violence.
Another argument that people make is that the U.S. is the most dangerous when it comes to mass public shootings, or how many mass public shootings the U.S. sees in a year. That's also not true. We have, per million people, only 0.089 have died from a mass public shooting between 2009 and 2015. So that's not even a tenth of a person statistically. It's really, really small. It's almost, not worth making a point about.
Right.
This is 11th only in the U.S. and Europe. So France, it's number 3 on the list, and it's more dangerous to be in a mass public shooting there. 0.347 per million people die from mass public shootings in France during that same time period. And in Norway, which is number 1 on the list, 1.888 per million people died from mass public shootings during the same time period, 2009 to 2015. And these are all countries with much stricter gun laws than in the United States. In those countries, the ability to own firearms isn't even a right like it is here. It's just a privilege.
And so pretty much so far with El Salvador, France, and Norway, we've been comparing that they have stricter gun laws. Access to guns is not, it's not a right, it's a privilege, and it's way more difficult. And yet all of those places, you are more likely to be murdered with a gun than in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Far more likely.
Far more likely to be murdered, to be caught in a mass public shooting. Which brings up my next point. The U.S. isn't even the most frequent doesn't even have the most frequent mass public shootings. These numbers just show, like Zach said, that you are far more likely to be murdered with a gun, to be caught in a mass shooting, to be killed in a mass shooting in these countries than here in the United States.
You know, you can see from those numbers that gun control obviously does not work. But, you know, furthermore, as we look outside the U.S. to Europe, to El Salvador, to countries like that and compare the numbers, we see gun control doesn't work, but let's look inside the United States because gun laws are different across the states. So both Washington, D.C. and Chicago in the recent past, enacted handgun bans, meaning that you could not own a handgun in those cities. In that time, after the handgun ban, murders rose in D.C. by 156%, and they rose in Chicago by 41% during that time period. This is according to the Chicago Tribune. So this only, I mean, it not only shows that criminals will find a way around gun laws, but it just proves that, you know, gun control is only leading to a higher chance of you being murdered. You know, they enacted handgun bans with the intent of saving lives, and murder rose.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't just not work, it had the opposite effect.
Now, quick point, right? These bans have been stricken down by the Supreme Court for being unconstitutional. The Supreme Court noted that it was unconstitutional, you know, to quote the Second Amendment, to infringe upon the rights to own firearms. And that's exactly what these cities did when they enacted gun bans.
Right. So it didn't work, it had the opposite effect, and it was unconstitutional. And that's just within the United States. Furthermore, 98% of public mass shootings over the past 60 years, 98% of mass shootings have occurred in gun-free zones. This shows, number one, that 98% of those mass shootings in 60 years have been in places where the general public, the people being murdered, were not allowed to carry a weapon to defend themselves. And it also shows that due to that, criminals prefer their victims to be unarmed. So gun control is only going to take guns away from the people being murdered because criminals don't obey the law. You know, the black market exists so that criminals can operate outside the law. Drugs are illegal, stealing is illegal, murder is illegal, but people still do it. Why? They're criminals. So, you know, if we add another law, you know, banning guns, why should we assume that criminals aren't going to do it if they already do so many things that are against the law, you know? And other than guns, there's other ways to kill people, you know? The Boston bombing happened by a homemade bomb. In addition to this, in China, in a Chinese train station in 2014, there were some men that attacked the train station, and they killed 33 people and injured 130 using only knives. So, you know, enacting gun control, it doesn't work. Criminals aren't going to obey the law. And hypothetically, in an unrealistic universe where it would work, we see here that people die all the time by murders from other weapons. It's not a gun problem, it's a crazy people problem, you know? And in addition to that, as if these numbers aren't enough, guns are used 80 times more often to save lives than to take them. The average deaths in mass shootings are lower when there's an armed citizen present than if they wait for law enforcement to get there. I mean, that's just how it is, you know? We said before that criminals prefer their victims to be unarmed. You know, if I'm going to rob a bank, I'm not going to go into a bank where I know everybody in there is carrying a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's just common sense. And so if guns are used 80 times more often to stop criminals, why would we take them away? It's helping us fight the criminals.
It's also important to note that more guns doesn't necessarily mean more crime, like some people on the left would have you believe. People on the left and gun control advocates. There was a study done and showed that as more people started buying guns, crime began to drop. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that more guns cause less crime, but it certainly didn't hurt, and it certainly didn't cause crime to increase, like gun control advocates would have you believe.
Correct. You know, like we said before, used 80 times more often to save lives, and you know that's not even counting the times that criminals know there's going to be a gun present, so they just never do anything in the first place.
And there's tons of anecdotal evidence that supports good guys with guns stopping bad guys with guns.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, like for example, the Texas church shooting in Sutherland Springs, Texas. The way that the shooter was stopped was that a citizen went out to his truck and grabbed his AR-15 and shot at the shooter and shot back and chased him off. The law enforcement couldn't get there in time. And the only way that the shooter stopped shooting people was they shot back. You know, how many more people would have been shot if it weren't for that happening? Obviously, there's some counter arguments in this situation, and we're going to recognize those because, like we said, we're not here to get angry at anybody, and we're going to recognize that there are counter arguments. And probably the biggest counter argument right now, the reason that people want to take away guns, that they say it's too easy to get a gun. You know, obviously for anybody, but they think it's too easy to get a gun, and therefore criminals can acquire guns and kill people too easily. But pretty much, the simple way to put that is, you know, if you have nothing on your record, if you don't have a criminal history, if you've never committed a felony, if you pass the background check, which doesn't take that long, it should be easy to get a gun. It's your right. You know, the government shouldn't make it hard to exercise a right given to you in the Constitution, you know?
Regardless of anything else we've said today, we have a fundamental right, not necessarily given to us by the Constitution, but recognized by the Constitution.
Exactly.
We have a fundamental right to own weapons.
Second Amendment.
Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was not written for hunting. It was written so that we could protect ourselves from anything. Tyrannical government and invading government, if we ever, you know, have to raise up the militia again. You know, thugs, you know, criminals trying to rob us, people breaking into our house, and of course it does help if you want to go deer hunting. Another point is, why should we punish all law-abiding citizens for someone messing up? For a criminal doing criminal things, why punish the law-abiding citizens by limiting their access to weapons?
Correct.
To take away somebody's rights like that, you have to prove intent. You have to prove that they're going to do damage, they're going to do something illegal, that they're going to infringe on somebody else's rights. You have to prove that they're going to do that before you can take their rights away. And like you said earlier, if they haven't committed any felonies, any violent crimes, if they're not, you know, if they don't have a violent mental illness, if they're not a danger to anybody, why should we limit their access to guns? Why raise any flags about that? There's already, you know, adequate universal background checks in place that catch that if it's properly, you know, documented.
Back to the original circumstance that brought up the need for this video. What happened in Florida? The shooter, Nicholas Cruz, used an AR-15. Now, remind me the name of the brand again?
Armalite.
Armalite.
It's a brand name.
It is a brand name. An AR-15, it's not an assault weapon. There is no such thing as an assault weapon. You know, if a gun is used to assault someone, then you could call it an assault weapon, but you can do that with a golf club, too. You know, you can do that with a knife or a bomb. You know, and whenever liberals and whenever the left side, or really anybody, tries to attach the term assault to a weapon, it automatically makes people think that that gun is designed for criminals to go kill people, and that is not the case. It's not the problem with the tool, it's the problem with the person using the tool. The person is assaulting. And a lot of people say, well then, why is it called AR-15? Because a common misbelief is that it stands for Assault Rifle 15, and it does not. It stands for
Armalite 15.
Armalite Rifle 15. It was the name of the brand that originally made the gun. It's kind of like a tissue and a Kleenex. A lot of different gun companies make that same model now, so just the common name for it is AR-15. Furthermore, he used an AR-15. And there's also been the argument of there have been 18 school shootings since the beginning of the year, which would be, at this point, by this shooting, just a month and a half. And that does sound very tragic, and I'm not saying that the shootings that have happened aren't bad. But we need to make one thing clear. That number includes a lot of different things that weren't mass shootings. For example, a stray bullet striking a university window. Someone committing suicide in a parking lot, which is incredibly unfortunate, and we hate that that happened, but it's not a public mass shooting.
It's not gun violence.
It's not gun violence. It's not a school shooting. It's something that someone did to themselves that nobody else could control. So that 18 involves a lot of different things that no one was ever hurt. They just unfortunately occurred on school grounds, and so they're called school shootings, but they weren't mass shootings. So students claim that they weren't surprised, and a lot of students at the Florida high school even predicted that Nicholas Cruz would shoot up the school. Which leads us to say the FBI even received a tip, and the police were called on Nicholas Cruz 39 times for him being violent. He was expelled from the school for being violent, but nobody acted on it. Which, you know, as if nothing else that we've said is good enough proof. That's proof enough that this is not a gun problem. That was the FBI not following protocol problem. And like Bradley said earlier, you know, yes, he purchased his weapon, but there are so many steps and so many reinforcements put up in place to stop people who have committed a felony, who have a criminal history. And if that is, you know, permanently and adequately documented, they cannot purchase a weapon. That's already the law. Something that everybody's arguing for, that's already the law. In this case, it was the FBI didn't document it. It wasn't the gun problem, it was the FBI messed up. So don't be mad at the gun, be mad at the FBI, because let's say that the FBI did document all of those things and did investigate him after the 39 calls to the police. We wouldn't be here.
Yeah. So, what do we think the solution is? Well, we think the solution is to arm the teachers. You heard of Aaron Feist, you know, the hero football coach who shielded his students from being shot while taking bullets himself. He ended up dying, yeah. What do you think would have happened if he was armed and properly trained? Sure, he might have taken some bullets, but not without returning fire to the shooter and taking the shooter down with him. Also, you gotta have them armed, because what happens if your school, you know, officer chickens out, like they did in this shooting? So what do you do then?
You just have to wonder how many people did the shooter kill after he killed Aaron Feist that would not have been harmed if Aaron Feist would have been permitted to carry a weapon.
So we're not just saying to arm teachers, just blindly give all of them guns. We want to require them to go through a little bit more, you know, training than your average concealed carry. Like here on campus, here in Arkansas, they've just recently enacted a law where if you go through an enhanced concealed carry permit class, you can carry weapons on campus.
Right.
And that's, I think, 8 hours of more intense training in addition to your average concealed carry weapons
Which
permit.
is fairly intense as it is. You know.
Yeah, and we just think that's really the best solution, the most safe solution.
And I think it's worth recognizing a couple common arguments against arming teachers. People would say, you know, what if the teacher decided they wanted to be a shooter? Well, Teachers are of the highest trusted group of people on the face of the planet, if not the most trusted people. They protect our kids, they love our kids. They are of the top and most supreme trusted and noble people. They would never do that. And being a teacher, you have to fill out tons of documentation. You have to go through tons of background checks to make sure that you would never harm a child in any way other than physically in the first place. I mean, you have to do tons of that if you're going to work with children. So they've already been through all that. And then to carry a weapon, we're saying they would go through even more. So, I mean, there would be no way that someone would just slip through the cracks.
And in the extreme off chance that were to happen, that's why the teacher next door has a weapon too.
All of the other teachers have weapons, you know? And then I think the other common argument would be that, what if a child decides that he wants to take the weapon from the teacher? Well, the whole point of it being concealed carry is no one knows that you're carrying it.
And it's on you. It's not in the desk.
Right.
It's on your person.
It's on your person. Nobody knows where it is on your person. So if somebody ever tried to take it from you, you could grab it and you could confront them with the weapon before anything ever happened. It would prevent so many of these school shootings from happening. All of the problems that would arise, you know, like we said, guns are used 80 times more often to save lives than to take them. That number will go up if you arm the teachers. You know, absolutely.
Before we go, we're going to leave you with one quick thought. We mentioned earlier that deaths from mass shootings are much lower if armed citizens are present than if you wait for police to arrive. And we think that that number alone should be enough to arm the teachers. And we're just going to leave you with that, just to think about.
Food for thought.
Food for thought.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah.
Yeah.